Today we're going to be talking about having those tough conversations, those dementia conversations, including driving, doctor's visits, legal and financial planning. And my name is Janelle Mines. I am a recreation therapist, and I have been working in the field with memory loss and cognition impairment for close to 10 years now. I am a dementia care practitioner, and I'll be pulling some of the information that I know. Again, I don't think anyone is a dementia expert because every single person's dementia is going to be different. But however, I'm going to be pulling from past experiences and personal experiences as well. So today we will be covering how to have those tough conversations, how you talk with your entire family, including that person with signs of dementia, and about some challenging and often uncomfortable topics that are related to Alzheimer's and dementia. These discussions are not going to be easy for you to have to discuss. And so there's typically a lot of fear with hurting your loved one or facing those challenges related to aging and dementia, and being forced to deal with those family dynamics that may not be as easy as, some of the things that I am trying to relay to you. Some things are going to work for you and your family and your loved one, and some things won't. So always going back to the Alzheimer's Association, and we'll kind of talk about how to get a hold of the Alzheimer's Association after this presentation for 24/7 hotline. There you can schedule an appointment or get more resources and information of what's going to specifically work for you. So with having these tough conversations, you may want to wait until the time is quote unquote right. But in reality, that time rarely occurs. The sooner these discussions can take place, the better, due to the fact that the wishes of the person with dementia can be included as much as possible, and unexpected situations can be avoided in the future. So we'll head to our next slide. And some of the most difficult conversations that we're going to be talking about today are going to the doctor, deciding when it's necessary to stop driving, and then making those legal and financial plans to cover the future care needs. And keep in mind that as we talk about each of these conversations, we do offer a variety of approaches, but like I mentioned in the very beginning, not all of these will be appropriate for each individual. The approach that will work best for you involves your family and yourself, and individualizing and customizing that approach for your specific loved one. And I say this every single time, but dementia is like a fingerprint. Everyone's is completely different. So that being said, there's not a size fits all for the conversations of care. And some things that work for one person will not work for another. So today's program will share some tips for breaking the ice and having those difficult conversations when your loved ones are showing signs of Alzheimer's or dementia. It will help you plan ahead and build a care team that will work to communicate to reduce some of that stress that can accompany the disease. And it will give you the opportunity to hear from people who are dealing with these similar issues. And there are a lot of people dealing with these similar issues. They'll be giving examples, and then some things that have worked for them. And also we'll be connecting you with some helpful resources to enhance the quality of life of everyone involved, and that's including the caregivers as well as that person affected by the disease. So I wanted to quickly we're going to be talking about caregivers, care partners, and so I just wanted an overall term for what a caregiver or a care partner is, and it's someone who is responsible for looking after another person. And I think that's extremely important. You may not think of yourself as a caregiver, but you may be noticing some of the changes or signs in that person that you care about, and that's causing concern. And your concerns deserve to be heard. So often we find ourselves completely avoiding or talking ourselves out of having those difficult conversations for several reasons. Sometimes our family members say that they don't need our help. So if you go to talk to your family member or a loved one that you are seeing some cognition issues with, they can become upset. They can become defensive. They can become suspicious of you, and that is part of the disease. And it will put you off as a caregiver and as a loved one, not wanting to have that conversation again. Another reason would be assuming that other family members who live closer are taking care of things. So this actually is personal with my family. So someone that lived farther away was thinking that if someone living closer that was seeing my family member every day hadn't brought this to their attention, then maybe they were not, they were kind of making the situation into a bigger one than they actually needed to. So if something was wrong, the person or people closest would have mentioned it already, which isn't always the case. And the last little bit would be that we fear that we might be taking away that person's sense of independence. You might be taking away their quality of life, and you're fearful of upsetting your loved ones, or possibly with the family dynamics that the family may disagree about whether there is a problem or not. And we talked about this in a different presentation, but when there is a family member a little bit farther away or a friend that's a little bit farther away and the only means of communication is over the phone, a lot of the times with people going through this disease, social chit chat will stay intact over a longer period of time. And so it's harder to notice when it's socially over the phone. People with this disease, they retain on the right of their brain, the right side of their brain, which is their rhythm. And so they can carry along a conversation. Hi, how are you doing? I'm doing fine. How's the kids? How's, this and that? And then, hanging up the phone. It takes a little bit more, asking different questions, different ways of approaching that person to kind of really get into the thick of things where you will be able to see that change, that cognitive change, especially in the very beginning of the disease. So someone that may be a little bit farther away that just has those phone calls with your loved one, they may not be able to see that there is any type of problem, which can cause those family dynamics to kind of stretch a little thin. So on our next slide, we're going to be talking about, I believe that there's 5 different successful conversations. So the first one is, having that conversation sooner is better than later. So we're not wanting to wait for a crisis to occur before having these conversations. You can actually avoid a crisis by talking about the issues and taking action in advance. So talking early in the disease process, you'll be able to hear directly from that person with dementia about his or her wishes, while the person can still contribute and be a part of that planning. So for example, for the sooner is better than later, I had a resident in my past that the family did see that he was having more and more issues with wandering and his lack of communication. He wasn't able to verbalize a lot of his needs and wants. And he would go for walks, and they would vary in time. His family just didn't know how to approach him or kind of where and how to get help. And one day he ventured out a little too far, and he did go about an hour away from his home just on foot. And unfortunately, as he was wandering, he was wandering around a neighborhood, couldn't figure out how to get back, couldn't verbalize that need, that he was lost. And a person in the neighborhood had called the police. The police came, was asking him questions. He wasn't able to answer those questions. And so they actually took him into custody. So they handcuffed him and put him in the back of the police car, and brought him to the station, and he slept there that night. The family was very concerned, and that was a crisis for that family and for that specific person going through the disease. But the wandering, the police station, and then the trauma that followed could have been avoided if they were given the tools that the Alzheimer's Association does provide families. And there's even a way to give your local police stations a heads up, a picture, information of your loved one, a medical bracelet. You can even go in and have fingerprints taken to have them on file, just in case that your loved one does wander. But that's kind of an extreme case. But that's just another way to, don't wait for a crisis to occur before having these conversations and having plans in place. The next one is developing a plan for using quote unquote finesse. So how you're going to introduce the topic in a way that will be gentle and minimize that resistance of that person living with dementia. So the use of finesse goes beyond honesty. And this is what's very difficult for especially spouses to feel as if they are almost kind of going against their marriage to their loved one and lying. But you also need to consider what the positive outcome could be of, finessing that conversation. So my family in specific, in order to get my uncle to the doctor, we needed to let him know that he doesn't believe in doctors, first of all, but we kind of told him that, is having us go for a physical exam in order to qualify for Medicare. It's a physical and a cognitive exam, and my aunt had to do it also, and getting him there on those terms. But you'll want to consider of what you will do regardless of how that person responds. So, for example, having the person ask the person whether he or she would want to know if you have noticed any changes in functioning. In most cases, the person will say yes. But if they do say no, focus on the fears that accompany these changes and how important it is to talk about them openly. My recommendation would just be to have a doctor make that initial diagnosis and conversation if you are not comfortable with doing that with your loved one. If you are able to talk open and honest with the doctor ahead of time, not in front of your loved one, or have a list of type concerns for the doctor before you go to that appointment, I think that also can help with those conversations and kind of alleviating the main caregiver of that task. The next one is taking notes about the changes that you see. So you'll begin observing and noting examples of different behaviors that concern you of your loved one. You'll take notes after you see something of concern and that you can accurately talk about what you've noticed. So some of those could be that something is being misplaced, or some type of agitation is occurring. And what my recommendation would be to also write, what environmental conditions are happening at this time. Was the TV on? Was the music or a radio on? Was there something going on outside, maybe an ambulance or sirens? Just anything that environmentally was happening during this time, and also write down the time of day, as well as what had actually happened. But the time of day is also important if you start seeing a trend, in the late afternoons. And be prepared to talk about your own feelings, using I statements and trying to avoid any suggestion of blame or criticism of the person, so he or she is less likely to get defensive or angry. And being gentle in your discussion, so keeping the person's feelings in mind. You'll want to avoid having the person with those changes occurring feel like they're getting ganged up on. So in order to help with that, the fourth one would be practice and in advance. So rehearsing, talking about those sensitive topics with other family members, you can really practice and get some good insight from other family members on how they felt while you were talking about your concerns. And consider the possible solutions to offer during the conversation. Let them know that they're not alone, that you're with them throughout this entire process. And there's things that you will do with them to kind of get you both through this, so that they just have that feeling that they are supported. The fifth one is initiate the conversation at a place and time when the person is relaxed, well rested, and comfortable. So you will sit close to the person and use empathy. Speak from your heart about the concerns. Do this in a private place, not a public area where there's a lot going on. It's hard to focus. And also, I would recommend initiating a conversation in a place or an area where the individual that you're talking to and about these concerns that you have with them, that person has a place to escape to. So if it's too much for them, that they have a safe place wherever you're going to be talking to them about this. So when someone in your life exhibits changes in thinking or behavior, it's important to be aware that they could be signs. Sorry. Does anyone have a question? No? Okay. All right. So there are changes that could be typical of aging, such as taking a longer time to remember names or needing to have a reminder about how to use, I don't know if that's playback or let's see. I don't know if I'm just getting some playback on my end. What's going on here? There we go. Okay, can everyone still hear me? Hope so. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. All right. So we were talking about conversations about going to the doctor. There are different concerns and changes with typical of aging. So these are in a different presentation. However, they are, these are typical of aging, but taking a longer time to remember names or needing a reminder about how to use the remote control, those are some normal changes. Some abnormal changes would be issues that go beyond that typical aging. So getting lost in familiar places, withdrawing at social functions when they used to be personable and talking all the time with and holding conversations, and now they're withdrawn and not really getting into any of those conversations. Asking the same questions repeatedly, so it would be asking a question and maybe 10 to 20, maybe a minute later, asking that same exact question. And then forgetting recent events, so forgetting things from earlier that day or a few days back. But people with dementia typically first recognize signs that have to do with forgetting how to do things that they used to do with ease. So if someone was managing the money and they were the financial person in the household, and it's something that they can't concentrate, you're noticing the checkbook is not being balanced the way that they've always balanced that checkbook, and they're meticulous about that. That's definitely a cause for concern. Managing money, remembering appointments, things that they've always done. So those conversations can go smoothly if a reference is possibly made to these changes, rather than those that the person has not noticed in him or herself. So I know that we have some talking points that the Alzheimer's Association has put together, but something like I'm noticing that you're forgetting more things lately. Does that concern you? Are you worried about it? Just trying to ease into that conversation and really have them speak their own emotions and feelings about each of those. So sometimes the person may be reluctant or fearful, angry when you try to get them to seek help. And this may be because of the feelings, the stigma of the disease. And that's what we're trying to do with these presentations also is reduce that stigma of what Alzheimer's and dementia is. But it could also be, that reluctancy of your loved one kind of understanding why we're trying to seek help. It could be the disease itself. They really don't remember those things occurring, and that's when suspicion can fall upon that caregiver. But we do have some tips and tools that can help you get your loved one to the doctor. So again, it can feel awkward to approach someone about the changes that you've noticed, but in many times, the person has already noticed these in him or herself and has some concern. And another piece is just that child to a parent role reversal. Sometimes that is extremely awkward, especially in the differing generational gaps. As a child, you're taught to respect your elders, respect your parents, and when you're in that role reversal and kind of telling them what to do and kind of dictating those things, it can be extremely difficult, not only for that person going through it, but also the children that now have all of this weight on their shoulders that they need to be making these decisions. So my recommendation would be to go back to the tips or reach out to the Alzheimer's hotline. They're available 24/7. So here is a video, and we're going to hear from Donna, and she's going to be talking about the importance of having this conversation.
I think you have to be honest. I think that's the important thing with this. To get a loved one to the doctor, I think you just need to be candid and honest of what are you trying to do. We're trying to understand what we're up against. It's just so important to do that, because you can't battle something that you don't know what you're battling. Again, it may not have been Alzheimer's. It could have been depression. It could have been so many other things. And guess what? There's other things you can do to take care of those issues as well. But that's what you need to be able to do. You can't ignore something. It's not going to go away.
Okay, so some tips to help with going to the doctor. So it's important to get that person that you are concerned about their cognition to the doctor to see if the changes are due to Alzheimer's, dementia, or something else altogether. Some things might be, a UTI, delirium, stress that can affect someone physically or mentally, emotionally. And there are treatments available that can help the person, whether the diagnosis is Alzheimer's or something different. Some things that can slow the progression in the very early stages of this disease. But the person cannot receive that treatment until they've seen a doctor. So you can be honest with the person with the symptoms, about the fact that this medical determination needs to be made in order to receive the best care. So going to the doctor, using words that are most comfortable for that person. So be aware that the person may be sensitive to particular words, such as Alzheimer's, dementia. For example, you can say, let's talk with the doctor about the fact that you're having more trouble doing some things than you used to do. That statement is a lot more comfortable for a lot of people rather than saying to that person, we need to have you see the doctor to do an assessment for Alzheimer's disease. That's a little harsh, and that is something that may not go over well with your loved one. The next one is letting the person know that it is time for the annual wellness visit. So this is something that worked for my uncle. You know, the annual wellness visit has been offered at no charge. And this is something that Medicare, since January of 2011, has offered, is developing or updating a personalized prevention plan that can prevent the disease or disability. And the exam includes the person's cognitive and behavioral changes that may indicate a form of dementia like Alzheimer's disease. But many older adults have not heard of this benefit, and taking advantage of it can be the best way to get a person to go have their cognitive eval at the doctor's office. The next one would be pair going to the doctor's office with an enjoyable outing. So you may want to suggest going to see the doctor and then doing something enjoyable together. So maybe meeting a friend or a grandchild in the town where the doctor is, something to look forward to, right after the doctor. I wouldn't necessarily do it right before the doctor, but probably after. The next one would be invite family to communicate concerns and questions to the doctor also. So whether you're able to be there for the appointment or not, you can prepare a list of your own concerns and questions and provide that information to the doctor before the appointment. So a lot of the times in support groups, we'll ask families to write their concerns down, things that they've witnessed, even future concerns that the doctor may be able to kind of give a little guidance and relief. And because of that doctor-patient confidentiality and protections under the HIPAA regulations, the doctor may not be able to speak with you about his or her patient without a signed release. But if your family member does agree to it, it could be very helpful to get that signed release of information that would allow the doctor to communicate directly with you. And the release can be signed at the doctor's office. And then in the future, seeing how you can get, power of attorney of your loved one or get that situated. That is also why it's a good thing to have this done. These conversations with that person with those cognitive impairments ahead of time, so that those decisions can be made ahead of time. Who is going to be the power of attorney? Who is making those medical and financial decisions? The next one is, if that person is still reluctant, try to use a quote unquote therapeutic fib. So there will be times that when the person with symptoms is extremely reluctant to see the doctor, regardless of the attempts to use reason. We really don't want to try and reason with the person with dementia. It's 10 out of 10 times it most likely won't work. People with Alzheimer's often experience a reduced ability to use that good judgment and make good decisions, and that's due to the disease itself. So sometimes this contributes to the person's reluctance of going to the doctor. No matter how many times that you try to let them know that this is something that you have to do, that disease is relentless, and the disease will tell that person that doesn't need to be happening. They don't need to see the doctor. They know what's best for them. They don't see any issues of how they've been acting or any behavioral or medical changes. In these types of situations, the person's safety and care does come first. So you may need to do a therapeutic fib to get that person physically to the doctor. Some family members or friends tell the person that a doctor's visit is required by insurance. That's what happened with my family. In order to authorize prescription refills or renew a policy, etc. Invoking this outside authority can help the visit to seem less like a criticism of the person and more of just something that we have to do on an annual basis. So the next slide we're going to be talking about, and as we've heard from others, having a conversation about driving may be one of the first difficult conversations families need to have after a diagnosis. You may notice signs that your family member's driving has changed. This could be something a little bit bigger, like accidents or tickets, moving violations, um, or things that are more subtle, like new scrapes on the car or in the garage, or something that you have seen while you're in the car with that person. You've seen them make mistakes while you are in the car. Even though many of us will need to stop driving at some point, there the reluctancy of considering this issue is very difficult for families. Taking away that piece of your loved one's independence is a heavy burden. But denial that anything is wrong can allow a dangerous situation to continue. But dealing with that issue early on can help ease that transition. So we are going to hear from Chris, and he is going to tell us about how this happened with his family.
There's no exact answer on this is when you stop driving. You can tell when coming up to an intersection, as an example, the ability to understand what's going on around you was starting to deteriorate a little bit. Being on the highway with cars on both sides becomes a little bit more difficult. And first and foremost, the safety of everybody in the car as well as other drivers on the road. You think about that, and you want to make sure you're not putting anybody in danger. But then the difficult part is telling your dad, who you love, and you know he loves driving, and he's used to it, that he can no longer do that. But then even then, taking the keys away full time was very difficult. The doctor was very helpful and just saying, medically, you can't do this anymore. But my mother had the hardest time with this because she knew how much this was going to hurt him as well. And this is one of the first things that we had to deal with as a family when it came to telling my dad that he had to stop doing something because of this disease. That meant a lot to him.
So there's no single moment that will, when the decision to have your loved one stop driving should be made. Again, we don't want to wait until a crisis or an accident or anything detrimental is going to occur. But you can incorporate the person's doctor or other professionals to let the person know that it's time to stop driving. So I know at Grand Living, they have the in-house occupational therapists and physical therapists that can evaluate driving. And I think that occupational therapists are licensed for that as well. So you may want to call occupational therapists in your area, physical therapists, to see if that's something that they do. They look at the person's reaction times to things before even having them go into the vehicle, just to see, even if it's just at a baseline, to kind of see what another professional's opinion would be. So whether the changes in driving are due to Alzheimer's or not, there are some ideas that people have found helpful when discussing this very sensitive topic. You're going to plan ahead before an accident occurs. So before changes in the ability to drive are seen, talk about that fact with that person, that they will need to stop driving at some point. Many families find it very helpful to have an open discussion and develop an agreement about how the person would like to recognize that it's time to stop driving, such as noticing more mistakes on the road or new scrapes on the car. And when that time comes, the person may not remember that conversation, so it can be helpful to write notes. You can always contact the DMV and have them, take a test from a professional. My recommendation would be, if you are going to, if they are not going to get their license back, to replace that with a state ID of some sort, some type of identification that they can keep in their wallet or in their purse, because it is a piece of dignity and independence to have their picture and their name on something that they've had in their pocket for almost their entire life. The next one, it would be express your concern about the specific changes that you've noticed. So let the person know that you care and support about them and reinforce that this is the reason for your concern, that you really do care about that person. So use specific examples to show that there are some real problems. So an example would be saying to that person, last week you did something really different. Here's what happened. Following it up with, that concerned me. Does that concern you? And just kind of seeing what they can recall. And these are the types of things that I would write down. These are the lists of things that I would write down. If you have, concerns, or even writing down what that person has responded to you bringing that up, just so you can keep track of things. And if that doesn't work, using something different in the future when you bring that conversation up again. The next one would be appeal to that person's sense of responsibility and concern for others. For example, you can say, I know that you wouldn't want an accident to happen and for you or someone else to get hurt. This may work for that person also to kind of put in a different perspective of why you are concerned about them driving. And I think we have another video, and it's, if you anticipate that the person may resist having that conversation about driving, there are specific ways to make it a little bit easier. And so Sheila in the next video is going to talk about how she personally approached it.
Some tips on having the conversation is pointing out, especially for my father, the potential danger to others that it may cause if he's behind the wheel. And just talking about it from the standpoint that this is not only the best thing for you, but this is also the best thing for others around you. And these are some of the alternatives, making sure that this is what's going to happen, having a plan. If mom can't take you, then Uncle Thomas or will be here to take you, and we will make sure that you're getting out of the house and that you're doing some things. So, presenting the bad news, but then also presenting the plan. And for my father, that's really, really important to have a plan.
So like Sheila mentioned, having a plan for alternate transportation in advance, if there's a drive or outing schedule, something that they could put on their calendar, and something that they can count on is having that alternate transportation. So be sure to include that transportation to places that will help that person maintain social connections and hobbies. Going to stores, appointments, church, if they have a bridge club, and when you talk with that person, provide that reassurance that you will help them maintain their lifestyle. There won't be many changes other than the fact that they will not be physically driving themselves to those places, but that they will still be able to participate. The next one is incorporating the voice of an esteemed professional and having empathy. So sometimes it helps to have a physician write a letter or a prescription stating that the person must not drive. So that there are reasons, at this specific point in time, the doctor can say that they, that license is revoked, they need to stop driving their car. And as you are having that conversation, you're using empathy and thinking of ways to foresee and minimize that person's sense of loss. So maybe consider talking about this from the standpoint of retiring from driving rather than it getting pulled from them or revoked or giving that piece of their life up. But maybe it's time for us to, you've driven your kids around for how many years, and it's time to repay the favor. So trying to turn it into some type of positive thing. So here's Wendy talking about how a key component to making this conversation into a successful one. So we're going to hear from Wendy.
Talking to somebody driving, I think it's most important to understand that that is tied to someone's independence more than most things. And so by saying you can't do this anymore is like telling the person, it's like ripping away their independence. And that doesn't feel good for anybody. I know that I've always tried to put myself in that situation. What would I think if someone was saying this to me? You don't get to do this anymore. And how would I feel? And how would I want somebody to talk to me about this? And so if you try to I think sometimes too many people try to approach it as, very punitive. And I'm doing what's right for you. So why don't you understand, without really turning the tables and putting themselves in that position, understanding, how helpless that feels to take those things away. It's important to be thoughtful about what that experience is like for the individual.
All right. Do you want to know that on alts.com, so alz.org, I'm sorry, yeah, it's alts.org, not com, but they have a Dementia and Driving Resource Center, and it really emphasizes the availability of videos demonstrating having conversations with driving issues. So the Alzheimer's Association never wants someone to feel alone or that they have no idea where to go from this point. Direct your attention to that resource, and it's alz.org. So one of the ways that we can all provide ourselves with choices that maintain our independence is by making those legal and financial plans for our future. So many families do this only to be taken by surprise when dementia enters the picture. So, having that future planning, considering those options, doing research, and being proactive. So the next video we are going to watch is as a medical and long-term care costs in the U.S. rise, families may need to step in and provide both care and help with that person's finances. So we're going to listen to Chris again while he speaks a little bit more about the legal and financial planning.
Disease will increase the cost of living. It's just a fact. So planning for those extra costs is that much more important than what you were planning for before. And so you have to review everything that's in place, see what changes need to be made, both legally and financially, and you have to monitor that going forward afterwards too.
So we kind of know the facts and the figures about Alzheimer's and dementia, and that by even by 2050, there's going to be over 14 million people with this disease, and that means more caregivers that will be taking care of people living with this disease, whether that's unpaid caregivers or paid caregivers. Future planning and considering different options for memory care communities. What are the options for home health care? What are the options for keeping someone at home, and just being proactive and just figuring out what the options in your area are, what resources that you can kind of think about ahead of time. So it's always a good idea to review documents to make sure that they're current. But once there is an Alzheimer's or dementia diagnosis, plans that were put in place years before may need to change. So that includes wills, that includes who's the power of attorney. So updating those forms may need to occur, and that's kind of being proactive with those different financial and legal plannings. So some people may have plans in place, but may still be uncomfortable discussing financial status with you. You may also feel reluctant to do anything that comes off as intrusive to that person. Talk about it. Making legal and financial plans early can ensure that that person's preferences are included in all the plans through their life. So that families will not have the burden of, making those rash decisions that they're not sure whether or not their loved one would agree with. Getting a lawyer involved, future planning, having those difficult conversations about, the future with your loved ones. We're going to listen to Julie in the next video, and she will be talking about how she talks with her friends who ask her about having this kind of discussion with her mother.
Here's what I've come to after all of this. That it's the most loving and kind thing you can do for them is to be honest with them and say, this is like a really scary thing. And I feel a lot of discomfort bringing this up to you. But I tell them, if you're going to be the one who's going to take them on this journey, then you have to tell them, I'm going to be here on this journey with you. And there are things that we have to do to get this in place. We're going to go on this journey together. I've told you I'm going to be here with you till the end. So let's get this ready. It's like we're going to go on an ocean ship. We've got to get things packed up. We've got to figure out what we're taking with us. We got to get ready. And the things that we have to get ready, we have to make sure that we know which doctors you're going to be using. I need to get this signed, okay, so that if you go in there and they have to do surgery, for example, I got to have this durable power of attorney for health care for you. I have to have this worked out, okay? Now, if for some reason, okay, you need to go to rehab after something, I have to have these documents here, the financial stuff, so I can get these things taken care of for you while this is going on. I don't want to have anything get in the way of us being able to progress and keep doing this. I said, it seems hard because it's hard in our heads. Everybody's read about people who've stolen from elderly people, who've done these horrible things. But if you're the person who's approaching this with loving kindness and compassion, and you're willing to take this person on this journey, you're not doing a bad thing. You're doing the right thing by talking to them about it. And you approach it from the standpoint of, I'm here for you. I'm doing this for you. We're going to do this together. And I'm going to help you through this. And these are the tools that I need to make sure that we can do this.
So I think Julie explains those things very well. Having them know that you're part of their journey with them, and that these are things that need to be done in order for you to have a smooth journey together. So talking about these sensitive issues is a kind thing to do with someone with dementia. And our fears about how the conversation will be perceived and how that will be perceived may keep us from taking this step. But it's very important to approach the conversation from the standpoint of being with that person during the course and needing these documents in place. And it does give them a sense of control, independence, and dignity to have them involved in this planning. So we're going to advise to begin by explaining that you were in this together. So again, some of these discussions, they go against all of the social norms and things that we've been taught our whole lives. That with that role reversal, it represents that shift in family roles. Understanding that having this conversation will help you and the person with dementia make the plans you'll need to get the best care, will allow you to connect and enjoy your time together in the future. So even though it's difficult now, just knowing that burden will be off of you as a care partner for the future, and you can really just spend time with your loved one. And it can also be very reassuring to let the person know that you will be a part of the process now and in the future. That way, the person you love can feel that you are on the same team together. Second one would be to start by asking questions and gathering documents. So think of the conversation as a chance to ask these questions rather than telling the person to do something. So what documents are in place now, and where are they kept? Who has copies of the documents, and who should have copies? Who should review these documents? Family, professionals, and pull them all together and get the ones that need to be completed or altered. So in my family, it's been extremely important to have things very organized. Things are in one spot. Everything's labeled. It's, you know, the DNR different forms that they have. It's in a separate folder binder. Then it's the legal copies of, you know, some financial things that are taken care of, and there's a copy that went to the lawyer as well. There are some different, when there was a big family meeting, you know, everyone's suggestions and opinions, and those are also in those documents of just, you know, what's going on and what your loved one will actually want to, how they would want to go forward in this disease process. So, you know, those things organized in one spot so that you're not frantically looking for different things. You know where they are. They're labeled, and they're organized, and that will not only help you, but help your loved one. The third one would be explain that these are standard plans that need to be made as we get older. You know, having those tough conversations. My parents are only in their 60s, but we needed to have that tough conversation of, you know, what are your wants and needs for the future? If there's an accident, what is something that you will want? We, you know, had to go to that step of living wills and, you know, cremation versus, you know, cemetery and being buried and things like that. So those are the tough conversations, and it was hard for me as their child to have to bring that up. But it was something that after we had that discussion, that's just something that needs to happen when anyone gets older, just to know what the plan is for that specific person. And I was honestly very surprised at some of the decisions that my parents let me know that they would like. So it was a learning experience for me. And then break the conversation into parts and try different times and locations. You know, if you've only had the conversation via phone, try it in person. You can also write a letter to get it started, have questions kind of written down that you'll just kind of go off of. And don't feel like you have to cover everything in one sitting. So it may help to do the planning in smaller segments, maybe doing person's finances one day and then maybe legal documents at a different time. And then also involve others to help talk about finances. So ask a financial advisor to help with the conversation, or involve a brother or sister. Some families make decisions to pool resources and then ensure that care can be provided and the expenses can be paid. But it is important to understand that the financial situation so that your family can help you make the best long-term care choices. You can also have, you know, as a power of attorney, you can have just the financial part or just the medical part. You don't have to have everything together, so it helps to get some help from others. Just as having these difficult conversations is challenging, caring for someone with Alzheimer's disease is also a challenge. But there are steps that you can take to make things easier for everyone involved. And as our veteran caregivers tell us, no one can do this alone. Every single person is part of this team to provide the very best care for your loved one. And the best care teams work with the best communication. So having those conversations, talking with the other people on your care team. And as with any team, your care team works best if there's an open flow of communication when decisions are made together. You know, there's different family dynamics in every single family. So there's lots of different resources if, let's say, siblings don't want to be involved in this process. There are resources to help gain support and guidance through that. And so if you are taking that piece and you are part of that person's care team, you are really, you know, you are the center of it all. You are the support system, but then you also need a secondary support system to hold you up also. So families typically look to their primary care doctors to help with making those medical plans. A lot of people do depend on the medical team. Medical professionals who specialize in that area of dementia may be helpful to be included to make that professional diagnosis. And once that diagnosis is made, find out who will coordinate that care on an ongoing basis. Often it is the primary care physician, but your care team does not stop there. So the next layer would be peers. And peers can be a tremendous support to the core care team members. As the disease progresses and the care increases, friends can offer much needed breaks and emotional support. The next one is everyone that is working of the care team should contact their company's HR or employee assistant program about caregiving benefits. Families can then look at their entire pool of resources and make the best decisions that are going to work for your individual loved one and kind of your situation. Again, that fingerprint, every single person's is different. Every single person's dementia is different. Every family is different. Every way that this is going to work is going to differ. The next would be there are community resources available where you work and live, and some are online, so your entire family can have access to that information and that support. This presentation, this is something that you can send to your loved ones also, contacting the Alzheimer's Association, talking to professionals within this team of people can really help you gain all the support that is needed. You're not in it alone. I think that's the biggest takeaway from having this care team. It goes through to your family, the medical team, peers, your company or any workplace, and then all the community resources. There's lots of different support groups throughout the different communities, and I know that you can contact the Alzheimer's Association to see the closest support group to you. So the Alzheimer's Association Alzheimer Navigator is a tool that allows your family to create a personalized action plan to connect you to local resources, information, and support. So on the screen, you'll see where you can go to find that support. alts.org and the helpline that I was talking about a little bit earlier. I think I called it a hotline, but it's the 24/7 helpline, and it's available all day, every day. The alts.org Find Us, so those have support groups, the educational programming, and it's available in communities nationwide. And also some training, free online education programs that are available also at training.alts.org. So this is, just one of the many resources the Alzheimer's Association provides for people going through one of the most difficult periods of their lives. And so getting involved in the community, it will connect you with others that are going through this situation as well. You're not in it alone. There are countless people that are in the same shoes that you feel you are drowning in at this very moment that can help you and support you. And remember that no one can provide all of this care alone. So the sooner in the disease process that you have these conversations, the more smoothly the team can function to provide that assistance. Helping the person you're concerned about begins with talking and having these difficult conversations. So on the next slide, you'll see the website address and the toll-free helpline number, and you can call and contact the helpline at any point in time. They're there to you and your family and anyone that you know who is affected by Alzheimer's and dementia. So thank you so much for joining our presentation today, and I hope you got some tips and kind of a little bit more education on having those difficult conversations. Please contact the Alzheimer's Association if you have any further questions. Thank you so much.